Views expressed are not endorsed by the United States Department of Defense or its components. Welcome back to the Flyover Podcast as part of USAFA Aviation. Today, we are privileged to have Captain Drea Mystique Moffett with us today. She is the flight commander of scheduling assigned to the 94th Flying Training Squadron, USAF Academy, Colorado, as an instructor pilot in the TG-16A. She plans and executes 20,000 sorties with 24 aircraft while overseeing a $3 million maintenance and towplane contract, and executes 9 ATC syllabi for 1,300 students annually.
Captain Moffett entered the Air Force in June of 2016 through the United States Air Force Academy, earning a Bachelor's of Science in Biology with a minor in Spanish. After commissioning, she worked at the USAFA Preparatory School as a military training officer, leading, training, and supervising over 130 cadet candidates in all aspects of military training. She went to Laughlin in Fort Novosel for undergraduate pilot training, flying the T-6A and the TH-1H, and went on to fly the UH-1N Huey at the 37th Helicopter Squadron, 582nd Helicopter Group at F.E. Warren Air Force Base. She progressed through aircraft commander and instructor, and her jobs included Standards and Evaluation Liaison Officer, Group Executive Officer, and Chief of Training. Captain Moffett accumulated over 700 flight hours in the UH-1N, with many supporting Operation Global Citadel. She is fluent in Spanish, and she is married to Captain Kaz Moffett, who's currently a physics instructor at USAFA.
Ma'am, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, so let's hop in right into your flying career with the Huey. So it's a little old.
Just a little bit.
I guess like it's a Vietnam era aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it like flying a Vietnam aircraft in the modern Air Force today?
It's definitely interesting. The aircraft that we had at F.E. Warren were all 1969. So, and even before that, the actual Vietnam era aircraft that flew were down at Fort Novosel. So I actually flew one of the tails down during training that flew in Vietnam, which is so crazy to think about that. I guess the technology and the aircraft infrastructure that was made back then still is going today. You know, all the aviation stuff that they created back then is just so insane to me. So, so we have the ones from 1969 at F.E. Warren, couple ones made in the early 70s at Malmstrom and Minot. And it is crazy to see that a lot newer aircraft are being phased out and out of the boneyard, and we still see the Huey going strong. I know the one at Fort Novosel, the TH-1H, they have refitted it. It has nice new avionics. The UH-1N Huey is still all steam gauges. We have like 3 screens in the cockpit, one for the Garmin, one for our heading indicator, and we have one for the forward-looking infrared camera. So it's definitely seeing newer aircraft and seeing all the avionics and all the newer technology that's in it is it's definitely intimidating when I go back to flying the Huey. So
yeah, and so like talk me through, it's such an old aircraft, but it's still used today in the Air Force. So like what is its mission set?
So the Huey is unique in the sense that it doesn't have the same mission set at every base it's stationed at. So the mission that I supported was in Global Strike. So F.E. Warren, Minot, and Malmstrom are all Global Strike bases, and we pretty much did nuclear surety and security. So our main mission was to provide aerial overwatch during convoys, where they would take, in a big semi-truck looking thing, they would take the nuclear warhead to and from maintenance, so normally from the base where they would conduct the maintenance out to the launch facilities where the missile would actually be underground. So that's, we would do, those are our main convoys. The convoys were our main mission. We would do normally 2 to 3 convoys a week at each base. And our other mission set was missile security sweeps whenever they were doing any maintenance at the launch facility. We would have cops on board, and we would go double check and make sure everything is looking good and that nobody's trying to do anything nefarious at any of the sites. At D.C., Washington, D.C., the 1st Helicopter Squadron, they do DV airlift there, as well as the 459th Airlift Squadron in Tokyo. At Yokota Air Force Base, they do DV airlift there as well. And our other base, active duty base, is in Fairchild. They do ATC support, so they do SEER support, and I know they do, they have other mission sets as well. They do a lot of integration up there with the SEER guys. So it's definitely interesting that we're one of the only aircraft, I think, that has different mission sets, completely different mission sets. Like you have to go, if we would get somebody at F.E. Warren that PCS from DC, they would almost have to go through an entire like CMR combat mission ready course. And then same thing, if I go to DC next, that's a completely new mission for me. So I'm going to have to get completely spun up on it. So that's the mission sets that the Huey does.
Yeah, well, shout out Captain Guardy at the Yokota Huey Squadron.
Yeah,
gave me a Senate ride while I was out there for ops. But so talk me through, like, you're mentioning like the convoys. So like, say somebody rolled up and tried to like steal the nuke. What's your move as the Huey pilot? Like, are there security forces on board? Or would that look like?
So a convoy is essentially, once the nuclear warhead is in there, it is a PL-1 asset, which is like some of the most guarded stuff in the nation pretty much. So kind of the same thing as a presidential motorcade, where like it can't stop moving. It needs certain approval to stop moving, especially if it has like a flat tire, like it needs to keep rolling until we get permission for it to stop. So the convoy is also part of like several different cars. So it's just the one semi-truck that has the nuclear warhead in it, but there's a ton of like Bearcats and OSI vehicles, SF vehicles, other Bearcats that are, certain distances in front of it, certain distances behind it. Those are all filled with, like I said, SF, OSI, a ton of security forces and a ton of different arsenal that they carry. In the helicopters, you normally have two for each convoy, one that is overhead and then one that will go do scout. So we have a route that the convoy will take, and the scout aircraft will go check out the route, look at the underpasses, make sure there's no like lane closures that might affect the convoy, any trucks really like parked on the side of the road that could be impeding. Like sometimes SF will go and double check and make sure it's nothing crazy. And in both helicopters, we'll normally switch positions throughout the convoy if one of us needs to go refuel. But in each of the helicopter, it's two pilots. We have two flight engineers in the back that double as aerial gunners. So they'll each man an M240. And then we also each carry two security forces members. One will normally be like a sniper team, and then one will normally be an assault team, so close range. So if something were to happen, I mean, there's all these different like blowout plans that the guys on the ground have. And then for us in the air, I mean, we stay current with gunnery patterns and pretty much getting everything locked and loaded in the aircraft. And, between the CRM, as you know, is a really big thing in any aircraft, but, making sure between the pilots and the flight engineers, like we get everything ready, locked and loaded to, do what we have to do to defend the nuke. And so, yeah, we practice gunnery patterns. We also practice infills and exfills, where each of us will cover. So like the one that's covering the infill for the other aircraft, they'll normally do like a gunnery pattern while this aircraft is dropping off the security forces guys, and then we'll swap positions, and then that way we'll have our security forces members on the ground and set, and then we're pretty much in the air doing gunnery patterns as needed until one of us needs to go refuel or anything like that. So
you mentioned a lot of moving parts, a lot of different teams. You've got security forces, you've got OSI. How far in advance were you planning ahead for these missions?
So because they happen so often, we normally get the site that it's going for about the day before, and it's a full day of mission planning where it's normally like one of the co-pilots that's going to be on the convoy that's going to be flying it. They get the route ready, and the integration with the guys on the ground is normally just kind of the day of when we do the briefing of here's what's going to happen, here's the roles and responsibilities. But it is a full day of mission planning with routes and fuels and like getting everyone in the crew ready and everything like that. So again, full day of mission planning, and then day of we have a couple meetings before just to make sure everyone's on the same page. The wing commander briefs us for every single convoy. So just so that we don't lose the importance of what we're doing. Like, yeah, it's, she's sitting in there every, 3 to 5 times a week that I've seen a convoy roll every day if there's a ton of maintenance going on. But that just shows us, the importance of the mission that we're doing, that she's taking the time out of her really busy schedule as a wing commander of a missile base to, make sure that we've got all of our stuff down so that the mission is a success should anything happen.
Yeah, so, the missions you're talking about are very important. It's kind of like sort of like the Secret Service, right? It's a very high level asset. I mean, it's a nuke. But does ever those missions get a little like stale or boring? Like it's kind of like the same thing over and over, and you don't really like. I mean, I'm not gonna say you don't see action, but like, I mean, maybe you have. Like, is
no, unfortunately,
but like, yeah, unfortunately, right? Like, how do you stay engaged and like not become complacent?
Yeah, so that's definitely interesting how you ask. I mean, for me, the mission never got boring. I think convoys, we get used to them, and okay, we load up, we get all of our night vision goggles, we get everything ready. But the convoys at you find different ways to make convoys interesting, whether it's just like getting to know each other more as a crew. But the flying part does get a little mundane, just because like when you're overhead, the convoy itself is going, 60 to 70 miles an hour. So you've got to figure out a way to kind of do figure eights or stay engaged with the convoy itself. And then when you're scout, it's a lot more interesting because you're flying low level. We're flying 50 to 100 feet. So that part is a little bit more interesting. But for me, each combat mission ready member would normally fly about a convoy a week. And because it was once a week, aside from all the other stuff that we were flying, you found ways to make it interesting. There's like, okay, another convoy today. Yeah, it's the same thing. But we would normally try to find different ways to improve ourselves as pilots, even on convoys, where when we were done dropping the aircraft off either back on base or the nuke off either back on base or out of the launch facility, we would practice. We would integrate with the guys on the ground and do gunnery patterns where they would call a certain, 9 line to tell us, hey, there's a bad guy over here. That was when we would get more integration with the ground guys, which that was pretty fun. So the mission, like the flying itself, could get mundane, but then, we found different ways to progress as aircrew members. On the other side, when we would do missile security sweeps, where we would go double check that the maintenance was going well, those were the days where we had a little bit more liberty to we would go practice scenarios where we would like go do gunnery patterns, drop our security forces off at a site, then they would engage as needed. We would build up an entire scenario of, like you mentioned, like someone trying to roll up on a convoy or at a launch facility. So those were the days that like you always found something to improve on. Everyone, whenever I was like either flight leader or aircraft commander of one of those flights, I would get a different mission objective or a personal learning objective from every single person of what they wanted to improve on, and then we would go practice that. So
outside of those main 2 missions, like what did the other Huey flights, just for like currency, or like what were you all doing?
So if it wasn't convoy or MSS lines, missile security sweeps, we practiced. So what I've come to learn being at the 94th, learning about other communities as well, is that they normally practice their emergency procedures in the sim. In the Huey, we would practice 4 different ones in the actual aircraft. So we always practice auto rotations. So in case anything ever happened, dual engine failure, we had to auto rotate to the ground. So auto rotations is something that we are very proficient in. We also practice single engine failures. We turn one of our hydraulic servos off to get to have to fight with the hydraulic pressure in our tail rotor pedals, as well as we would practice going from automatic to manual fuel control. So where we have to, when we're making inputs in the collective, we also need to make inputs in the throttle. So that was one of the things that I found that is unique to us, that we fly actual EPs, like we put our aircraft into kind of a not wanted situation.
You talked a lot about what you want to do next, but I was wondering how your previous experiences have informed who you are as a pilot now and how you're going to move into the next mission.
So with my previous experiences, so for right now, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing at the 94th. I think it's been incredibly rewarding. Some of the rewarding things I've done is actually another one is Luke Matthews, who's a class of 27. I flew his dollar ride in 251, so I flew his very first flight, and I flew a couple of his last flights before he got qualified. So I think seeing stuff like that go full circle is, I think, such a rewarding part that I've, I guess, experienced previously. And I think the full circle moments coming into my future career is going to be really cool. So it's going to be people that I flew with at FE Warren that were just starting out. I mean, me being here for 3-4 years, I'm going to get to see them. Like, they're probably going to be my instructors when I go back and requalify in the Huey. So those experiences are keeping in mind all the stuff that all the friends that I flew with at FE Warren and how I get to see them progress as instructors, as pilots, even as the flight engineers, our enlisted guys in the back, which incredible part of our community. And sorry, what was the second part?
No, you're all good. The second part was how will that carry into your next duty station?
Okay. Carrying into my next duty station, so other experiences that I've had that have been really rewarding is coming out of the academy and going right into leading at the prep school. I think I don't want to say like being thrown into leadership, but it really is really what it felt like, because it was me as a brand new LT working with 2 AMTs to lead the preppies, which was super rewarding. And I worked with the class of 2021, the USAFA class 2021, and one of them actually asked me to commission him back in 2021. So that was incredible. So just those small experiences and other awesome flights I've had in the Huey. When I first became a instructor, one of my first instructor flights was one of my friend's first flights at FE Warren. So putting myself back in those shoes from, 3-4 years prior, like where it was my first flight, and, how integral those first few instructors were for my development. I kind of get to carry that with me for the future. So hopefully I'm going to DC next, and I would love that. But even just going back into the Huey community, like I said, the friends that I flew with, the folks that I trained up, where I was barely teaching them as a co-pilot. When I was an instructor, like now they're going to be my instructors and probably my evaluators. So kind of taking experiences that I've had and just always trying to find the positive of, those full circle moments and everything. So
you have, kind of bringing it back to your flying time in the Huey, you participated in Operation Global Citadel. So one, what was Operation Global Citadel? And then also, how did it best position and prepare the Global Strike Huey community for flying their mission set?
So Global Citadel was pretty much just a lot of the exercises that we did, because kind of how we were talking about earlier, of the mission that we do, hopefully in Global Strike, we never actually have to, knock on wood, do our mission. So it was just all the readiness exercises that we would do. So a lot of the big exercises is bringing in more. So we would have like even JTACs that would come out and do integration with us. So they would be the guys on the ground with the radios and calling in airstrikes. So I mentioned earlier that at the end of convoys, we would sometimes integrate with the security forces members on the ground, and they were barely learning, and we were kind of teaching each other, or really teaching them how to call in airstrikes. But when you get actual JTACs and really incredibly qualified people that are calling in these airstrikes. So it was a lot of just readiness stuff, to be completely honest with you. The different exercises that we would do as well. So we would go to our gunnery range at Guernsey. It was about a 45-minute flight in the Huey from FE Warren up to Guernsey, Wyoming. It's our range where we would go practice like live shooting. They'd have, a bunch of targets in there. So we would go and shoot blanks, and we would have like Connex villages, and that would be a lot more integration with the guys on the ground as well. Yeah.
And then when we're talking about the Huey, so we already kind of talked previously, it's a really old aircraft, Vietnam era. So how do you believe its mission set has evolved over time, or does it still kind of hold on to those core traditional mission sets?
The Huey mission has definitely evolved over time, I will say, because the Global Strike mission, so, with the history of Global Strike and Strategic Air Command and everything like that, the Huey kind of came online with Global Strike, and even getting the M240, I believe that didn't even come online until the mid-2010s, when that was integrated into the Global Strike mission, where I can't remember if previously to having the 240s, if we would just, fly and then integrate with folks on the ground, and then they would respond to anything that might happen, or, but I feel like it has evolved as much as it can. We've been trying to get bigger guns on it for years, and I don't know where that's kind of been since I've been out of the community for a little while now, but I feel like it has done its job. I know at some sad day it's going to have to make its way to the boneyard, but I believe that the missions that it's had, whether it's DV airlift or the stuff out at SEER at Global Strike, it's it's continued to evolve and change with the missions of the Air Force. I think the big change with bringing on the M240 and really widening our ability to do what we do in Global Strike definitely helped the longevity of the aircraft and keep it around for as long as we can. And we'll see what the changes with the new aircraft that we're supposed to be getting, the MH-139, that I'm sure we'll kind of talk about here in a little bit. But the MH-139 is supposed to be a lot more capable and faster and carry more people, carry more ammo. Unfortunately, the Air Force will have to move on from the Huey someday. I think it's going to keep flying the DV airlift mission in Yokota and Andrews. So I think it's, good for that. It's good for, picking somebody up, taking them, point A to point B. But I think we have needed to modernize, especially with our Global Strike mission, the convoys, and making sure that we're prepared and ready to respond to anything at any time within a certain amount of time. I believe that we've needed that modernization for a long time. So I'm happy it's finally happening with the 139, but at least the changes that we've made in the Huey for the past couple decades has at least helped our mission. So
yeah, so I guess we'll kind of just flow right into the future of the Air Force. So you mentioned the MH-139. Yeah. So what does the MH-139, like, why does the Huey need to go away, basically? Is it just like it served its time, it's a super old airframe, it's just like falling apart, like Saigon Hall, or is it like just like in like an upgrade to the Huey? And why is it so important and a strategic imperative for the U.S. to leave the Hueys behind and adopt this new airframe?
So with your initial question, a little column A, a little column B. I won't say the Hueys are falling apart. I mean, they're not producing anything on the Hueys anymore, so the maintenance is a huge pain, unfortunately, where, if we have, high engine oil pressure, something like that, it's normally a gauge issue where they'll just take it out of the aircraft that's there and bring it out from the aircraft that's going through its phase inspection. So, they're not making the parts anymore. So that's been probably one of the biggest slim facts. And, the 139 is just, it's obviously like pretty much brand new, a lot more capable, can carry a lot more. So again, I talked about that. We've needed to modernize for decades now. Funny story, when I was working as a group exec, my 06 commander found an MFR from the 1990s saying that and it was like typewriter, which I don't even remember people using typewriters in the 1990s. He found an MFR that pretty much talked about how we've already overflown the Huey by like a couple thousand hours, and how even then people were saying that we need to replace the Huey because they didn't think it would last this long. Obviously, when it was made, I think between the engine time or the rotor blade time, everything like that, the airframe time was only like going to be a couple thousand hours, and some of those aircraft have 25,000 hours on them. So, yeah.
Sounds like the A10 timeline, but just on a larger scale,
larger scale. So, yeah.
And so, like, to kind of just like keep talking about the MH-139. So right now, the Huey's mission sets are pretty much at home, like DV airlift, or like, you have Yokota, but DV airlift, nuclear security, etc. Do you believe the MH-139 is actually going to play? Not that it's not going to be in the future fight, but do you believe it's actually going to be on the front lines, or like what mission set could it provide to those frontline commanders? Like if we were to get into a large scale conflict?
So that's a tough question just because, sidebar, the Huey is one of the only aircraft that does not have a weapons school. And what I know, so my husband went to weapons school for ICBMs, and what I know about their curriculum and everything like that is the last like month of weapons school is WISNT, weapons school integration exercise, where they bring in everyone. So, every single airframe that's there, does their part of the mission, and, they all work together to pretty much squash World War III. The Huey has never had a weapons school, and there have been talks about getting the 139 into the weapons school. I don't really know what that looks like because, again, it's going to stay in the same mission. So at least right now, I know it's supposed to be going operational at Malmstrom in the next year or two, and then it's only going to pretty much phase out the aircraft at FE Warren at Minot and Minot. I heard DC is probably not getting it for a few more years because I mean the Huey is perfectly capable of fulfilling the mission there, but it's been quite a long time where we have not been able to fulfill pretty much our contracts with Stratcom with the timeline that if something were to happen, the time that we would be able to get ammo on board, get the guns ready, get security forces ready, and respond to a conflict or respond to something, X amount of miles away, or we haven't really been meeting that for a long time. So the MH-139 is going to help us get there. As for bigger aircraft integration, I can't really say what that looks like because it's only at the moment it's only going to replace the Huey and the nuke mission. I would love for us to have a bigger scale mission someday. We don't, how you mentioned that we're at home, so the Huey doesn't deploy. We have folks in our community that do deploy, but it's they go do a non-flying mission pretty much. So I would love to see the Huey mission and then 139 moving forward go to a bigger global scale, more integration with more aircraft, because the the helicopter community is already really small, and the global strike community is even smaller than that. So getting to integrate with more aircraft and everything like that would be awesome to get to see it on a more global scale at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned the greater pilot community, and I'm sure coming out of USAFA, many pilots. What do you think the Air Force can do to help retain pilots so that we have their expertise when we make those transitions, for example, to a new aircraft?
And to kind of add on to that a little bit too, so what are the unique challenges or benefits that the Air Force has to retain pilots, rotary pilots, compared to fixed wing?
Okay. I'll start with that one first, and then I'll kind of get to your question next. So from what I have seen, my 4 or 5 years as a pilot and, the folks that I saw getting to the end of their commitment in the Huey community is I tended to see more people stay in because I guess the civilian route to fixed wing, not saying it's easy, there's definitely money involved and a lot of training involved, but it is easier than going the civilian rotary route where, the folks coming out of, a 10-year career, if you separate out your 10, you do have plenty of hours to then transition to, flight for life. But the thing with the civilian side of helicopter flying, rotary flying, is it's not as lucrative as, being an airline pilot. So what I have seen is most people, they'll stay in until they're done with their 20, retire, and then that way, they have a retirement plan. Not that it's not a lot of money, it's just not, almost $500,000 that you're making as an airline pilot in the first couple of years. So what I've seen is, anecdotally, of course, is I've seen more people in the rotary community tend to stay in and take the bonuses because, there's a lot more that you can do in the next 10 years of your career that will help you set up for even more, that you'll start out. If you do transition to the flight for life stuff, flying at hospitals, the more flight time you have, the better chance you have at, starting at a bigger city, at a bigger hospital. So I've seen a couple of different other gigs that people do following their own, helicopter career. The people that I've seen separate at 10 were folks that maybe didn't enjoy it very much, and they transitioned to something non-flying. Like I just had a friend who he's just working a corporate job here in Denver. He just didn't enjoy it much anymore. He came out of 60s. So, and that's just kind of the ebb and flow of the community, and, how some people might get burnt out too, that the military might do that. So I think kind of going back to your question of, what can the Air Force do is, like I said, so this friend, he mentioned he was just really burnt out. He was an instructor at the weapons school, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on people because being at the weapons school for a full assignment, even being there for the 6 months, you're traveling all the time, to check out different mission sets and integrate with other folks. So, focusing on the burnout and taking our highest performers and giving them more and more and more. Like you would think that taking your highest performers, those are the people that you want to stay in the community to, whether they're good hopefully, you know, they're good in the aircraft and good as leaders as well. But sometimes the Air Force will tend to put more on those people and burn them out and make them not want to stay in the Air Force, which unfortunately is what I'm seeing in with a few, whether it be pilots or even other career fields. So people that I've seen that, you know, tend to stay in, they have been in communities and have had supportive leadership that, you know, they are more vocal about when they are starting to get burnt out. And so then they, you know, they transition to a different job, or their leadership kind of helps them out with like delegating duties so that they are motivated to then stay in. You know, the money is always going to be a motivator no matter what. You know, you have your extension bonuses in the Air Force, but you also have sign-on from what I've seen from the airline folks. You have sign-on bonuses and a really big paycheck. So money is always going to be a factor. But I think focusing more on, you know, the burnout part of it is really going to help retain people, hopefully.
Yeah, and so talking about like career progression within the Huey community, I remember when I was in Yokota talking to a lot of the Huey pilots and just in general talking about how, you know, there's certain career fields that don't, just by the numbers percentage-wise, don't make it as far in the Air Force as others, as say like an F-16 pilot. Why do you think that is for the Huey community, and do you think that negatively impacts the Huey community and the longevity of the community?
It definitely impacts it because we're already starting out with a much smaller pool of pilots. I mean, I know with F-16s and other fighter squadrons, and even, the 60 community is also pretty small as well, but I mean, you have 5 active duty bases. You have the schoolhouse at Kirtland as well. We're moving to Maxwell for the 139, but that's for the future stuff. But as per, I'm trying to think. Sorry, I completely just had a brain fart, John.
Nah, it's good. We were just talking about like exactly what
career progression.
Yeah, career progression.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so there's only 5 active duty bases for the Huey. So again, we're already starting out with a really small pool. So because we're already starting out with a smaller group of people, you know, those that are motivated to want to stay in past their 10, motivated to want to continue in the community. So I think in Hueys, there's only a handful of 06s. I don't think there's ever been a Huey general. Luckily, we've had great success with the leaders that have come into the Huey community are really awesome and very qualified. My first couple squadron commanders were started flying out in the 60 first, because the Huey community is newer compared to the 60s and CV-22s. My first couple squadron commanders they did a 60 assignment, then a Huey assignment, and then another 60 assignment, and then staff, and then they came to lead in the Huey community. The first guy was a weapons officer, and that was pretty much to like get our tactics, our TTP is what we call it, tactics, techniques, and procedures for the global strike mission and convoys and everything like that, gunnery patterns to really help get the community stood up when it was still kind of early on and we weren't really, that was kind of more of the time when we were really more of a jack of all trades, master of none. You know, we've progressed more to at least becoming better at our mission with gunnery patterns and nuclear security, everything that comes with that. So I think the Huey community has done pretty well with picking people and, again, going back to the burnout part and not taking good performers and just burning them out, taking good performers and developing them and making sure that they're in a good spot so that when we do get our squadron commanders, that they're ready and qualified. So I hope it doesn't lead to negatively impacting our community. We've been plussing up the community because of the 139. So, you know, the pool of people is getting larger. I've even heard talks of getting folks from the Huey community to become future missile wing commanders, so that will help our integration at the missile wings, because kind of a tangent, we don't fall directly under the missile wings. So at F.E. Warren, so it was the 90th Missile Wing, and we were pretty much a tenant squadron, but the Huey squadrons at F.E. Warren, Minot, and Malmstrom fell under the 582nd Helicopter Group, as you mentioned at the beginning, and then the 582nd Helicopter Group fell under 20th Air Force, and then 20th Air Force falls directly under Global Strike. So pretty much the 582nd Helicopter Group was in line with the missile wing commanders. So all that to say is we've been getting a little bit more integration with the missile wings as well, with sending Huey people to become wing safety. And so as we get more integration there, and, hopefully in the next like decade or so, we might see a wing commander, a missile wing commander, be a Huey person. I think that's going to help. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, all good. So when we're talking about the future of the Air Force and how pipelines are changing to become helicopter pilots, so when I think it's like Helicopter Next, it's called. It's the basically like skip UPT, go to helicopters. So you went under the older system of going to UPT and then tracking helicopters. How do you believe this is going to change pilot performance positively and negatively?
So the new program is called UH-1N. So it's like undergraduate helicopter training. So, I got about 100 hours in the T6, and I do really think that for me, so I struggled academically, starting here at the academy, but, there was a ton of time for me to get in the sim and in the aircraft. So I think being in the T6, learning to do like the really difficult stand-ups when they're putting you through the ringer for an emergency procedure, the air sense, like flying that fast really helps you, making decisions on the fly. So moving where, they do a full undergraduate, helo training now. They're there for, I think, 12, 14 months, going through academics and then flying they have their own IFT there as well, flying a smaller helicopter before they move to the TH-1H. When I was leaving FE Warren, we only had two young co-pilots that were part of the helo only track. And I flew with them several times, and I don't know what the, feedback from the squadrons has been, because for those guys, like, they were really good at flying the helo. Like, they knew what they were doing, and, they didn't have any fixed wing time, but for flying the Huey, like, they were pretty good at that. I've heard some different feedback about the air sense that flying really fast in the T6 gave you. A little bit of instrument flying, dealing with ATC and radio calls and everything like that. I've heard a little bit of positive and negative with that. I'm hoping it's not going to affect the community over, the next few years. The CV-22, I believe, I'm not sure if it went back to, you could drop CV-22s out of the T1 or T-38. I think it's only been dropping out of Fort Novacell recently. So them seeing a difference in folks that only, since CV-22 is, the tandem helicopter or the aircraft that can move into cells to kind of C-130 mode and then helicopter mode. I don't know if they have seen that community seen a difference with getting pilots that didn't have any fixed wing time versus, previously that we did. So I'm hoping it's going to help the community in the sense of we get better helicopter pilots. I'm hoping that it doesn't affect us, air sense wise, situational awareness wise, things that some of us may have benefited more from having that fixed wing time.
Yeah, and then kind of moving on a little bit, just kind of your background. So what drew you to the Huey? Like, was it your first pick, or like have you grown to love it, or why did you want to fly the Huey, or why do you love flying the Huey today?
So I love flying the Huey. So when I was a cadet, my sponsor dad was a Navy helicopter pilot. So I kind of always had that voice in my ear. I was always interested in helos from the start. I was kind of undecided between the 60 and the Huey. So my husband was a class ahead of me, and when he got missiles, I knew right then that like Hueys would be the only thing that would keep us together and be compatible. And so I, going through T6s, there were a couple Huey pilots that were there, and I talked their ear off and try to get a different perspective, because here at the academy I didn't know any rotary wing pilots. So going through T6s again, there was one or two, I can't remember, Huey pilots that went to T6s, because previously it would be more for like recruiting, pretty much like you want the helo representation in T6s, but now since folks don't go T6s anymore, there's no more helo pilots that go fly there. So once I was in T6s, that's when I knew I really wanted to go Hueys, and that was my first choice. So it was the competitiveness of dropping helicopters out of T6s previously was ebbed and flowed. There were some classes that nobody wanted helicopters. In my class in particular, there was 26 of us, and there was 5 of us that wanted helos, and there were only 2 slots. So they were pretty competitive for when I went through. So I ended up tracking helicopters, fortunately, went to do my time at Novacell, and so I wanted Hueys from the jump. Coming out of the academy, helos always sounded really fun. My sponsor dad, flying for 25 years in the Navy, like all these crazy stories about landing on aircraft carriers and, all the capabilities that helos have. So, So then when I didn't have much information going into the Huey, I still feel like I was kind of going into the unknown when I PCS'd to Fort Novacell, and then I went through academics and sims, and then my first flight in the Huey, like flying over trees, pretty much like once you take off is like directly over trees, and I've never looked back. So obviously I kind of looked back here, going back to fixed wing, flying the glider here, but I cannot wait to go back to the Huey. I love the mission. I love how it flies, and I'm hoping to be able to fly the Huey for a few more years before, the inevitable transition to the 139, but getting to see a new helicopter and everything like that. So, but yeah, pretty much to answer your question, I've always wanted to fly Hueys, and it's been really rewarding and super fun.
Awesome.
Well, you talk a lot about like your evolution of the Huey, but I wanted to swing back to your time at the academy. Mm-hmm. What experiences with aviation did you have here? What drew you to being a pilot?
So here at the academy, I went through jump after my freshman year, and I went through powered flight between my junior and senior year. So kind of a lack of a full circle moment. I didn't fly gliders here at the academy, and I'm flying them now, which is super awesome. I love being at the 94th. Jump is a little different. I think powered flight definitely opened my eyes to what a career in aviation was going to look like, aside from my sponsor dad. But that was my first. I did have, I think all 4 of my AOCs were pilots, but I feel like when we would have conversations, it was more about leadership experiences versus actual flying experiences. So powered flight was really one of the first ones where I met pilots that talked about being pilots and talked about their experiences. So when I was going through powered flight, it was a lot of C-17 representation and C-130, but I do remember C-17s being the most of it. So I remember, because at that point, that was before my senior year, so at that point, I was already set on going Hueys, but, the C-17 mission seemed really cool, so if there was any way that I had dropped T-1s instead of tracking helicopters, we would have found a way, we would have found a way to come back together at some point. But yeah, my aviation experience here at the academy was very limited. I didn't have any experience coming into the academy, flying wise. So powered flight was definitely that for me. And it was really eye opening and a lot of fun.
So in the Air Force also, like you are fluent in another language. So what's the benefit for being bilingual?
So for me, unfortunately, and I guess if there's any advice that I could give cadets that are out there, is if you are bilingual, apply for LEAP and get that exposure. Unfortunately, I haven't had too many instances of it being kind of beneficial for me in my career. Of my friends that are fluent in Spanish and they've done LEAP, they've done several TDYs to like Spain. One of my friends did, she TDY'd for like a month and a half to Colombia to do a ton of integration there with SOCOM and special forces and everything like that. So unfortunately, I cannot say it's benefited me much in my career. On the personal side, when I get to travel and stuff like that, it's really cool being bilingual. But as per the Air Force, I'm not part of the LEAP program. So I have not been able to kind of use it in the Air Force. So.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So, ma'am, to wrap up the episode, ending question, traditional question here on the podcast. Okay. We need an answer. What is the best aircraft in the Air Force's inventory today and why?
Okay. I'm biased. I love the Huey. However.
Big however. Wow.
Yeah,
transition.
I know. This is going to be tough. And,
name drop.
I have a ton of friends in this community, and I know I might get some hate from my Huey members, but I think the 60 is probably my favorite aircraft. I've never actually been in it, but I have a ton of friends that have flown it. I think its capability, its speed, I know it. I know it needs like air refueling and everything like that, but what aircraft doesn't? I really enjoy it. I really enjoy hearing about my friends and their experiences, that the integration that they get with the PJs and their deploying experiences where they get to fly on deployments and everything like that. So I think it has the capability of, gunnery, and then being able to, the reason why I would love to say the Huey is that, it can pick up and go anywhere. I know you can get the Huey at least off the ground in a couple minutes. I'm sure the 60 is the same way. So it just has a little bit more capabilities than the Huey, but kilos all the way.
That's like the F-22 pilot saying the F-35 is better. That was like straight backstab of your community. Well, ma'am, thanks so much for coming on and taking time out of your schedule. As a reminder for everybody at home, all these episodes are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts with clips on YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. With that, we will catch you all in the next one.